Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Offered in profound commemoration of Mahārahatī, Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's final 7 days teaching and her Parinibbāna with our Founding Bhikkhunī Sangha for the United Theravada Bhikkhunī Sangha International Program, The Pillar, Strength, and Liberation. The story of the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī. Greetings, all dear, most venerables, Mahateras and Mahateris, Teras and Teris, venerable Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Mahasangha, all dear Upasakas and Upasikas, Dhamma friends. Aradhaviriye pahitate Nichang talha parakame samake sawake patsa etang buddhanavantanam. Diligent, ardent, and resolute, always putting forth their best effort, seeing my disciples one and all in harmony. This is homage to all the Buddhas. This seems most suitable in the spirit of our united Theravada Bhikkhunī Sangha, coming together from so many different countries around the world in peace and harmony, dedicated to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha together. These are the words of the Buddha to Gautamī Therī in the Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Apadana. Give an overview. We'll be covering 3 parts and maybe a bonus if there's time. Part 1, an introduction to the text telling the story of the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī. Part 2, reading the Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Apadana, the story of the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī in the Pali, Tipitaka. Part 3, Mahāgautamī's legacy, 3 stupas dedicated to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī in India, per the Pilgrim Diary of Xuanzang. And then the bonus if there's time. Part 1, an introduction to the text telling the story of the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī. How do we know her story? An introduction to the text telling the story of the Parinibbāna. In the Pali canons, Polytext commentaries, independent Polytexts, Chinese canons, independent Chinese canons, independent Chinese texts, Tibetan canons, Sanskrit fragments, Gandhari fragments, and also Mahayana sutras. We find her story spread far and wide over the ages. Lady, an awakened one of great importance. In the Polytext traditions, let's take a look at the Pali canons. In the Pali canons, we find her story in the 5th Nikaya, or Khuddaka Nikaya of the Sutta Pitaka, in the Therī Apadana, which is sometimes called the younger sister of the Therigatha, in the Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Apadana. We've been hearing and seeing excerpts of this story throughout this program. Actually, these excerpts are from the commentary. So we have a recent translation of the entire Abhidhamma Pali, which includes the Legends of the Theris, Gautamī, number 17, translated by Jonathan Walters, which is now available freely online. This is a great boon. I'll be showing you the web locations for all of the resources that we're looking at here that I'm able to. So if you see this later on YouTube or you're joining live but you want to check back and find something, you'll be able to go to the United Theravada Bhikkhunī Sangha International YouTube channel and you'll be able to find the links and check it out online for yourself to follow up. I want this to be user-friendly and accessible. So, in the Pali Canon, Tipitaka.org, this is the VRI, Vipassana Research Institute's great work with the Chata Sankhayana Tipitaka. That's the Burmese 6th Council edition. We're in the Tipitaka Roman. Tipitaka Mula means the canonical text, and the Sutta Pitaka going down to Khuddaka Nikaya, then down to Abhidhamma Pali number 2, and then to the Ekuposatika Avaga number 7, the Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Therī Abhidhamma Pali. That's our text that we'll be looking at here. It's our primary canonical Pali text. So, as I mentioned earlier, I called the Theri Abhidhamma the younger sister of the Theri Gatha. And in the Theri Gatha, the final chapter, the largest chapter of all with the most verses, the Mahanipato, is Sumedha Theri's Gatha. It's number 16. You can see it highlighted on the left, and then directly after that, the Abhidhamma text begins. And Sumedha's Therigatha is actually very much like an Abhidhamma text of all the Therigathas. So it's the last in Therigatha, and actually it's the first in the Theri Abhidhamma, the Sumedhavago. So she's number 1 in the Theri Abhidhamma. So we go from her in the Therigatha at the end to her number 1 in the Theri Abhidhamma. So now we come to number 2, the Polytech commentaries. So we have this text also, a slightly different version that we've been having translations from Walter Pruitt for the Polytech Society, and a commentary on the verses of the Theris by Acharya Dhammapala. It's the commentary on the verses of the Theris, but it contains a slightly different version of the Theri Abhidhamma within the commentary. And this is called the Paramatadipani, this text, and it's that translation through which you've been getting the story of the Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Abhidhamma through this 7-day program during this time. That text is very top on the stack of excellent books on the topic of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's life and final passing. I recommend all of these. You can see in the top here Sacred Books of the Buddhists, commentary on the verses of the Theris. That's William Pruitt's translation for the Polytech Society. So now we go to number 3, the independent Polytechs. So the Prajāpatī Bhikkhunī Nirvāna is part of the Savaka Nibbana tradition of independently circulating Pali manuscripts in Southeast Asia, which are chanted by Buddhist monks and printed by Buddhists for traditional commemorative occasions. See also the Bimba Yasodhara Bhikkhunī Nibbāna. Take a look. This is a summary of Savaka Nibbana literature. The arrows point to the Prajāpatī Bhikkhunī Nibbāna, and then also to the Bimba Bhikkhunī Nibbāna, or Bimba Yasodhara Bhikkhunī Nibbāna, Parinirvāna. One example of such a text is the farewell of Prajāpatī Gotamī. This is a merit-making publication, royal commemorative edition published in 14 languages for the funeral of the only maternal aunt of the Queen of Thailand in the year 2543 Buddhist era. That's 2000 of the Common Era, after 50 years of her faithful royal service as lady-in-waiting. The publication topic was chosen by and final editing offered by the late Supreme Patriarch Samdet Prajnana Sangwara. Several of the beautiful drawings in our presentation by Mr. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Jenkaukam, a famous artist from Lanatai, come from this text. In the Polytext, it's transmitted that Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, at the age of 120, has come to intuitively understand in her meditation that the Parinibbāna of the Buddha and other great disciples is impending, and that her own time too has come. The Polytext traditions say that the Buddha announced his impending Parinibbāna to the Sangha 3 months beforehand. This is remembered and commemorated on the Magha, February, full moon just passed. Let's move now to the Chinese canons. An important note, these are early Buddhist teachings that we're going to be looking at here in the Chinese canons from the Savakayana or Shravakayana genre, also known as Hinayana or Theravada teachings. So in the Chinese text traditions, this is a listing of texts that tell the story of the great final passing of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī. You can see there are quite a few of them. What is she known as? What is she called in the Chinese text traditions? The first one that I've highlighted here, interestingly enough, she's called the Buddha's mother. And then Parinibbāna is transliterated in Chinese here. She's also known as Mahāpriyapathī Gotamī Bhikkhunī, as well as Mahāprajāpatī Bhikkhunī. And Xuanzang lists 2 different ways to write her name as Pajāpatī or Prajāpatī that he uses in his pilgrim records. We'll be seeing more of him later on. So, for whom the path is most dear in the Chinese text traditions. The characters here mean path of great love, or great love of or for the path. Prajāpatī or Prajāvatī was transliterated into Chinese from Kandari as, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Piyawati, something like this, possibly corresponding to the Kandari form of her name, Priyapati, beloved to the path, which becomes Piyawati due to Middle Indic developmental patterns. Mahāpriyapatī, for whom the path is most dear. Venerable Bhikkhu Pasadika has offered Chinese translation of the story of Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī's Parinibbāna from the Ekotarika Agama, which is the Chinese text parallel of what we call the Anguttara Nikaya, or it could be called the Anguttara Agama. Agama means what's passed down, Nikaya is a collection. Ekotarika or Anguttara means just further factors, one by one, so numerical discourses. Then Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī went to the Exalted One. She bowed down her head at his feet and said to him, I hope for a long time the Exalted One will bring the ignorant and deluded to their senses, and may his life never be endangered. Gautamī, responded the Exalted One, such words in regard to the Tathagata are not appropriate. The Tathagata can prolong his lifespan, which will not be short, and his life will never really be in danger. So this story comes up again later on. It comes up in the Polytext as well. We'll see this repeated again and again under the rubric of the story of the sneeze, a story within a story. Venerable Bhikkhu Analayo has also more recently translated the Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī's spectacular passing away and his miracle-working nuns in the Ekotarika Agama, which we see here. And this is where we find it in Chinese. This is the Chinese text of the Ekotarika Agama. You can see here she's called Mahāpriyapatī Gotamī Bhikkhunī. I'll read directly from it. You can see the Chinese and the English translation. The world-honored one said to the bhikkhus, "Among my disciples, it is Mahāprajāpatī who is foremost in respect of broad-mindedness and extensive awareness." This is interesting because in the Polytext we know her as being foremost in seniority of many, many knights, of great age, or being most senior. But here the Buddha is commending her and asking us to remember her for being foremost in respect of broad-mindedness and extensive awareness. I found this interesting. So Shobha Ranidash from India and studying and doing scholarly work in Japan wrote Mahāpajāpati, the first Bhikkhuni. And this turned out to be very interesting. She looked at a number of different Chinese texts and translated them. On the cover here we see an image that just looks like a Buddha image with a lot of monks, but actually that's Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī sitting in the center down there with 52 bhikkhunis. Here's a closer look. This is from Wat Theptida Aram in Bangkok, Krungthep Mahanakhon, Thailand. So that's Mahāpajāpatī, and since the picture on the book cover, she's got new gold skin. Many people have discovered that she's there, and having been shut up and left alone for hundreds of years now, she's enjoying a really greatly increasing popularity and appreciation once again. This is also the image of 52 bhikkhunis, and coincidentally, in the Chinese texts, actually, rather than a tradition of 13 great Arahant bhikkhunis, which we recite from the Pali, there is a local tradition in Cambodia, as well as in the Chinese texts, of 52 great bhikkhunis. Their names are listed here. You might be able to see Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī top, front and center, Khema Therī and Upalawana Therī, foremost at the top, left and right. I think most all of these would be familiar names to you here. So looking back again at Shobha Ranidash's work, then we have some important things circled here. Here we find that the saying that the Tathagata would surely attain Parinibbāna within 3 months, lying down between the twin Sala trees in Kushinara. Then it's circled in the Chinese text below that says 3 months. And this is important because in the Pali text we could guess that Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Therī has decided to enter Parinibbāna at the time that the Buddha has also decided that he will after 3 months, but it doesn't say that really clearly. However, in the Chinese text of the Ekotarika Agama, that's the Chinese relative of the Pali text Anguttara Nikaya, it specifies that this is 3 months, that is around the Magha full moon, 3 months before the Buddha's own Parinibbāna, and that's the time that Mahāpajāpatī decides on her Parinibbāna. So that's said explicitly in the parallel text. So in the Chinese text, not only do we have the books or manuscripts, but also in scrolls. On the right here we see a scroll painting of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī. This is from Japan, from 1839, It's actually one of a pair. The other painting on the left is of Ananda Tero, and then there's information about her life, from her verses. They are painted onto the scroll itself. So we find more information here. So now we're moving into what's called independent Chinese text. That is, it's not the part of a canonical collection. And there are two more that are independent Chinese texts. Professor Jan Nattier has been working on translating these and given a number of interesting lectures and workshops over the years on the glorious death of the first Buddhist nun, the final nirvāna of Mahāprajāpatī, from what's called T144 and T145, which are two early Chinese renditions of the story, now assigned to the late 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. There are many things that are similar to the Polytext or the same, and there are a few things that are different than the Polytext as well. So this is her work, draft translation in progress. I hope we'll be able to read her final book when it comes to be published with interest. Now we come to Gandhari fragments. And it seems that the Chinese traditions that we've been talking about in the Equatarika Agama or some others that Jan Nattier was working with may have passed through Kandara and the Silk Road, and even this Cambodian tradition of 50 or 52 outstanding bhikkhunis seems to have perhaps passed through the Silk Road into Southeast Asia. Here you can see a Gandhari scroll telling the story of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī. This is the Gandharan version of the Dakshina Vibhanga Sutra, or Dakshina Vibhanga Sutra. Now we come to the Tibetan canons. Important note again, Tibetan canons and Tibetan Buddhists are famous for Mahayana Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism, but here we're talking about early Buddhist teachings that have also been preserved together in the enormous Tibetan Buddhist canon. So this is of the Savakayana or Shravakayana genre. Here you can see Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī, her name in Tibetan script. She's also known as Mahāprajāvatī and Mahāgotamī in Sanskrit. And she has another name as well in the Mahayana texts, Sarvasattva Priyadarshana. I notice the Priya here shared with her name in Chinese, Mahāpriyapatī. And here's an image for you. Himachal Pradesh, India, Dongyuk Yatsal Ling, founded by Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo. The top image is of Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Therī, and it's part of a larger painting. The image below then has the great Theris, Shravaka, Arahant Theris, Shravika on either side of her. So, introducing you to the texts in the Tibetan text traditions, we find the story of Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Theri's Parinibbāna in the Vinaya Kshudraka Vastu. This has also been translated into Chinese, maybe it's a slightly different version, at Taisho 1451. This text is related to the Polytext Vinaya Kandakas, Mahavagga Kandaka and Chulavagga Kandaka. And here you're looking at the manuscript in Tibetan of the Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Parinirvāna. I was so touched to see this. I appreciate one of the translators with the 84,000 project who's working on this, sharing this manuscript with me. So, Venerable Damcho, Diane Finnegan, her work, her dissertation for her degree in Doctor of Philosophy. For the sake of women too, ethics and gender and the narratives of the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, that's where I came to learn that this text exists in the Tibetan canon. In her dissertation, there are just 2 paragraphs that are translated from it. You can see here what I've highlighted. Then Venerables Nanda, Aniruddha, Ananda, and Rahula hoisted the bier of Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī. The Lord too also took hold of it with his right hand. We understand we have a text here that's telling the story of her Parinibbāna. Later, Venerable Bhikkhuni Dhammadina has also worked with this particular text, doing translations, and she compared the text in Tibetan and the text in the Chinese translation. So, of course, both the Tibetan and the Chinese are translations of the original. And she also looked at related Sanskrit fragments. Here we're looking at them ourselves, and this is where we find the 7 days teaching. It appears in the Tibetan translation and the Chinese translation of this text. I'm reading on the left here. She taught the Dharma for 7 days and nights, so that any of those many diverse individuals who heard it would attain great distinction. Now I'm reading on the right. Having returned to their nunnery, for 7 days they taught the Dharma to the 3 assemblies. The hearing of the Dharma made innumerable beings gain vast and extraordinary benefits. So the Tibetan translation specifies teaching both days and nights, that is 7 days and nights before her Parinibbāna. And the Chinese translation specifies both Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī and the 500 bhikkhunis taught for 7 days. So I'd like to commend Venerable Bhikkhuni Dhammadina for her research and translation of this text from the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya. That's really great work. Much appreciated. So coming back to the Tibetan text, the Vinaya Kshudraka, the 84,000 project is in progress translating this entire text. It is 1,280 pages in the Tibetan canon. You can see that highlighted in the center here. And it's being translated by Losang Jampel and Kaya Fisher. So I'd like to appreciate Kaya Fisher for reading over this text with me. I'd like to point out here the Bhikshuni's Pratimoksha Sutra, translation not yet started. Detailed exposition on nun's discipline, that's the Bhikkhuni Vinaya Vibhanga, translation not yet started. It would be really, really useful for our understanding of ancient Bhikkhuni Vinayas from the Shravakayana to have these translated. And I'd like to point you to look down at the bottom right here where it says sponsor translation. So the 84,000 project, if someone sponsors or a group of people sponsor a translation and they find translators for it, then they will be translated. So for anyone who is interested in and desirous of such merit and offering something so helpful to the international Sangha to increase all of our knowledge, then there's a wonderful opportunity. And here it is. This is the draft translation in progress. Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Parinirvāna, being worked on now with by Losang Jampel and Kaya Fisher under the auspices of the 84,000 project. So now we come to part 2. Reading the Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Apadana, the story of the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī in the Pali Dipitaka. So during this program, it has been wonderful every day to be listening to these readings and seeing the drawings or paintings that accompany them. And what you've been listening to is actually from the Theravada Atthakatha, the commentary, because the commentary on the Theravada, as I mentioned earlier, includes a version of the Theravada. It's not exactly the same as the one that we find in the canon, in the Khuddaka Nikāya. And I have been looking at these texts for years, and I thought during this time I would like to offer translation of the canonical text. And out of the nearly 200 verses, then I translated about the first 50 during this time. So I'll read them to you. This is from the Chatta Sankhayana Dipitaka Pali. Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī Apadana, the heroic biography of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī. These are the drawings of our Lanatai artist of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's life, nursing the Buddha, offering a robe, asking about entering monastic life, entering monastic life, becoming an Arahanta, Arahanti. Once the world's bright lamp, the charioteer of humanity, was dwelling in the lovely Kutakara Sala in the great wood of Vesali. At that time, the Bhikkhunī Mahāgotamī, maternal aunt of the conqueror, was dwelling in the Bhikkhuni monastery of that delightful town, together with 500 Bhikkhunis who were liberated once. She went alone into seclusion and reflected in her mind thus: the final nirvāna of the Buddha, of his foremost leading disciples, or of Rahula, Ananda, and Nanda, I will not attain to the age of seeing them. Before the final nirvāna of the Buddha, of his foremost leading disciples, or of Mahākassapa and Nanda, of Ananda and Rahula, before exhausting, vacating, and leaving behind these ayu sankharas, the life formations, may I go to the world's guide, the great sage, and seek his blessings. Likewise, the 500 bhikkhunis came to reflect thus. With Khema, chief among them, they reflected the same wish. Then the earth quaked, the drums of the devas thundered, and the devatas inhabiting the monastery were oppressed by sorrow. Hearing this with compassion, tears rose to their eyes, and her bhikkhuni friends approached the great Gautamī. Bowing their heads to her feet, they then spoke these words: "Noble lady, Ayyā, while you had gone to be alone, we were dampened with tears." They said, "The solid earth shook, the devas' drums thundered. It's as if crying is heard. What does this mean, O Gautamī?" Then she told them of everything, just as she had reflected upon it, and they all too each said they had been reflecting likewise. Intermission, points of interest. Our camera was wandering away. It's just done so again. Out of 40 Therī Apadanas, the Gautamī Therī Apadana is one of only 2 for bhikkhunis that tells a final Nibbāna story. The other is the Yasodhara Therī Apadana, the final Nibbāna of the Buddha's former wife, who also had a great following and became an outstanding Bhikkhuni Arahati. The Gautamī Therī Apadana is longer than all other Therigatas and Therī Abhidhanas at nearly 200 four-line verses, totaling nearly 1,000 lines. Yasodhara Theri's is next longest at nearly 100 verses. Khema Theri's is next, also slightly less than 100, as is Upalawana Theri's. The shortest are 5 verses, the average about 20 verses. In comparison, the longest Therigatha, Sumedha's, is 74 verses. They all go together to the Buddha with Mahāgotamī, as she's generally called here, in the lead, seeking the Buddha's forgiveness for any wrongs and permission and blessings to enter final Nibbāna, noting this will be their last goodbye. Elsewhere in the text, we see other great bhikkhu disciples do likewise. There are poignant moments when Mahāgotamī mentions people's tendency to put women down, and she apologizes if there was any fault in her for repeatedly requesting women's ordination or in her training of the bhikkhunis. The Buddha says she has been enormously persevering in the face of great intolerance, and, calling her a paragon of virtue, asks how fault could possibly be found with anyone who is an Arahant, who is entering Parinirvāna. There are further poignant moments when Mahāgotamī mentions how she was a mother to him, nursing and raising him, but actually he was like a father or mother to her, through his suckling her on the milk of the Dhamma, which quenches all thirst. She observes how people long for good children, but says she got the best, and that somehow humorously, after having a son like him, her longing for children is forever done. Interestingly, as his foster mother, she asks to see his body with the 32 marks of a great man one last time. The Buddha complies, his body shining forth like bright gold sunshine, coming free from dusky twilight clouds, a poetic reference to his golden skin and the color of his monastic robes. We note that in several of the non-Pali tellings of this story, the Buddha also shows her body after her passing, and Anandathero shows the Buddha's body after his Parinirvāna as well. Another interesting element is the story of the sneeze, mentioned earlier, a story within a story. Mahāgotamī blesses the Buddha, wishing him long life to the full extent of his ayukapa when he sneezes. Just what Ananda is blamed for not doing later, she does then. But here, the Buddha tells her that Buddhas should not be blessed in this way. She asks, how should a Buddha be blessed? He replies that, seeing the disciples all practicing dedicatedly in harmony together, this is the best way to bless Buddhas. A final interesting element in this summary. We know there are monastic rules forbidding bhikkhus and bhikkhunis showing off their own or their peers' psychic powers, and falsely showing them off is a big lie, an offense entailing defeat, parajika, very serious. However, here the Buddha himself asks Mahāgotamī to show her power, specifically for the sake of dispelling the doubts and wrong views that persist among people with regards to women's religious or spiritual full capabilities and attainments in his teaching. There are those fools who doubt that women too can grasp the truth. Gautamī, show your spiritual power that they might give up their false views. She then goes on to put an amazing, practically unparalleled feat of spiritual power, as do also her large number of founding Bhikkhuni companions. At 120 years old, she was still powerful. On other occasions, the Buddha asks Yasodhara, Rahula Mata, to show her powers as well. Likewise, his daughter from his previous past life and leading chief Bhikkhunī Therī. Women of wisdom, women of power, women leaders of the sasana. Mahāgotamī addressing the fourfold assembly just before her and her 500 companions' Parinirvāna. If you all have love or sympathy for me, and if you have gratitude, then steadfast in the true Dhamma, make valiant effort. In all of the tellings, Mahāgotamī, like the Buddha himself 3 months later, then successively enters the jhanas, deep levels of meditative absorption, as part of her process leading up to and into Parinibbāna. The different texts vary a little as to the sequence and whether she and the Buddha enter Parinibbāna from the 4th or the 1st jhana. From our Lanatai artist, the Parinibbāna of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī, and the Great 500. In most all tellings, eminent monks of the Bhikkhu Sangha, as well as the Buddha himself, play leading roles in Mahāgautamī's funeral. Leaders of the lay Buddhist community do too, coming to honor her or them and providing suitable materials for her cremation and that of the great Bhikkhunī Sangha. In our Polytech, the Buddha himself directs that her cremains be placed in his alms bowl. As the Blessed One, the Buddha, said of her in eulogy just after the cremation of her body, like something that sparks or flares when struck by a piece of iron in a fire that's blazing. As it gradually becomes calm and cool, its destination is not known. So too for those who are completely liberated, who have crossed the flood and bondage of sense pleasures, who have attained unshakable bliss, there is no destination to be pointed out. The Buddha then continued, much as he was to later say before his own final passing. Therefore be islands unto yourselves, with the foundations of mindfulness as your domain. Cultivate the 7 factors of awakening, and you will make an end to suffering. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Most of the versions then include relics and a memorial stupa or stupas being erected for Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī and her Bhikkhuni Arahati companions. Indeed, the Buddha mentions that Arahats are among those worthy of constructing a stupa when they enter Parinibbāna. In our Pali text, her stupa is constructed by the Lichavi princes in Vaishali, where she likewise first entered monastic life with this same founding group of bhikkhunis with whom she shared extraordinary merits from the past. We now come to part 3, the legacy of Mahāgotamī. 3 stupas dedicated to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī in India, per the Pilgrim Diary of Xuanzang. Three stupas dedicated to the memory of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī visited by Xuanzang on his pilgrimage were observed and recorded in Vaishali, Kapilavastu, and at Shravasti in Savatthi. This is an old copy of Xuanzang's Buddhist record of the Western world translated by Samuel Beale. Here the Chinese translation for stupas, Sotupo, is translated as towers. So it's not clear what's being talked about. The stupa at Shravasti is near to the Angulimala stupa and the Anathapindika stupa, is noted in the middle page here. The robe offering stupa at Nigrodharama outside Kapilavastu is on the right page. We can now look online at the Chinese on Sibeda. We can see here, yes, it actually mentions stupa, not tower. It's a kind of tower. And it is Prajāpatī, whose name appears here in orange. Perhaps some keen-minded person may have noticed that we earlier mentioned 3 famed stupas or pagodas or chaityas established dedicated to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī at Vaishali at Savatthi or Shravasti, and at Kapilavastu. But we only showed images of 2 records, missing Vaishali. That's because Samuel Beale's English translation shown earlier above here does not include translation of this part. However, in the Chinese text, it is there. At Vaishali. Not far from there is a stupa. It was built at the old house of Ambapali, and the Buddha's maternal aunt and many other bhikkhunis have entered Nibbana here. Now we've found a much more modern, good, complete, and accurate English translation of Xuanzang's record, and the PDF is free. In their translation, not far from here is a stupa built at the place of the old house of the woman Amrapali. The Buddha's aunt and other bhikshunis realized nirvāna at this place. We have Sibeda online to be sure. In Vaishali, 3 miles to the northeast in the district of Kalyan, there is a stupa built at the old residence of Ambapali, which she donated to the Sangha. The Buddha's maternal aunt, Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī, and the other bhikkhunis have entered Parinibāna here. The relevant text is highlighted. Where is this in Vaishali? Has the Mahāprajāpatī stupa site been found? See the big circle in the upper right quadrant, the yellow dot in Birpur. This is map 2, Sacred Landscape of Vaishali as described by Xuanzang. Kudos to the Retracing Bodhisattva Xuanzang project. You can see this on the Nalanda Insatiable and Offering blog from 11 September 2020, The Arduous Journey, Mahāprajāpatī and the Courageous Committed 500. Here we see the on-site exploration with stupa remains or monumental remains in the background. See also the 16 December 2020 Sacred Landscape of Vaishali and the Way Forward for Revitalization on the Nalanda Insatiable and Offering blog. Outside of India as well, Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's relics, or those that are attributed to her, persist. In Thailand, here, the Saririkadatu crematory remains from the private collection of Mr. Tongdehansa Gunarom, commemorated by special commission of the late Most Venerable Sumdet Rajaratana Mangala. And behind that we see the Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Parinibāna fresco from the inner ceiling of the Queen's Chedi at Doi Intanon. This is the ceiling inside the stupa. In Sri Lanka, this is at the Dambadeniya Mutukala Mahameona Nuns Monastery in Sri Lanka. And in Thailand, less than a month ago, this beautiful life-size statuary image of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī is standing here in the center on the right side, and the place where her image is enshrined, if you look on the left, you can see her standing there. And then behind that, the newly inaugurated Pratatu Mahavana, or Pratat Mahavan in Nan province. This is a reliquary stupa that's just been inaugurated, and her newly inaugurated beautiful statue is standing nearby, reminiscent of the texts where Mahāpajāpatī then went to the Mahavana, the great forest, where the Buddha had announced his Parinibbāna impending, and where we find most of the dialogue in these texts that we've been looking at. This is reminiscent in great remembrance. The legacy of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī in India. The great renunciation trail of Mahāpajāpatī and the courageous, committed 500 from Kapilavastu to Vaishali is being rediscovered, mapped, and prepared for Charika, walking pilgrimage once again. This is also on the Nalanda Insatiable and Offering blog. And ancient commemorative sites like the Mahāprajāpatī Stupa and Vaisali are being rediscovered once again. I hope the others may be too. The other two stupas. And the Buddha World School of Vaishali, observation of Parinirvāna Day of Most Venerable Arahant Bhikkhunī Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī, celebration of the Buddhist legacy of Vaishali. You can see this also on the Nalanda Insatiable and Offering blog. I'm delighted to see this celebration and remembrance re-arising and spreading. And I'd like to share with you the initiative to observe the Parinibbāna Day of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī, as also the Parinirvāna days of Sariputta and Mahamoggallana have been being observed in Bihar state for the past 10 years, since 2012. So we propose that Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's Parinibbāna, as one of the Buddha's foremost leading disciples, also be observed and remembered and commemorated. So now, in our overview, we've come to the bonus if there's time. We have a couple of minutes left. So, enduring popularity and importance. Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī has lived on in numerous Prakrit and Sanskritic, Indic, Buddhist, biographical or hagiographical traditions such as Lalita Vistara, Mahavastu, Divyavadana, Avadana Shataka. And she's also lived on in Mahayana and Mantrayana or Tantrayana traditions texts as well. That can be a big surprise for us in Theravada traditions. So, Mahayana Sutras. In brief, Mahāpajāpatī lives on, witnessing and joining. This is in Mahayana texts. Witnessing and joining for great Mahayana teachings with hundreds or even tens of thousands of bhikkhunis. And she's identified as a bodhisattva and predicted to Samma Sambuddhahood. Important note, this would not be possible according to the Savakayana or Shravakayana tradition. That is, after someone has entered Parinibbāna as an Arahant, they're not able to come back again. So, in the Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, the treatise on great transcendental wisdom, Mahāpajāpatī and the 500 bhikkhunis Parinibbāna is honored by the Buddha and Bhikkhu Sangha in ways similar to what we find in the early Buddhist teachings. However, in the Lotus Sutra, extremely popular and widespread Sadharma Pundarika Sutra, Mahāpajāpatī is identified as a bodhisattva and predicted by the Buddha in ages to come to become a Buddha called Sarva Sattva Priyadarshana, as mentioned above, with Yashodhara and her 6,000 entourage of 6,000 bhikkhunis, likewise predicted. I feel this speaks to their enduring importance. In the mantra Nahana tradition text, in the Manjushri Mulakalpa, the Noble Root Manual of the Rites of Manjushri, these teachings in this text are said to originate from Manjushri and were taught to and by Buddha Shakyamuni in the presence of a large audience, including Mahāprajāpatī. I'm just telling you what's here in the text, yes? So they show up together with many female Shravikas, and it mentions their attainment of Shravaka nirvāna. They are free from desire, developed halos of light, worthy of veneration, repositories of good qualities that facilitate purification, best among the multitude of beings, foremost leaders of the world, objects of worship of gods and humans, fields of merit, supreme leaders of two-legged, four-legged, multi-legged, and legless beings. These and other of the most senior of the great female Shravikas approached in order to salute the Lord's feet. And then it says they were eager to hear the Lord's teaching and to become a shining example to demonstrate accomplishment of mantra practice. So this is a mantra Nayana text, you see. And then I'll tell you, during preparations for this talk, as one of the interesting things I learned, a senior Buddhist monk in Tibetan tradition informed me that his late most venerable preceptor, I'm sorry I don't know how to pronounce his name, a greatly revered master and founder of Loronggar in Tibet, founding a great monastery in Tibet these days is an amazing feat unto itself, was said to himself be an incarnation of Mahāprajāpatī. This place name rang bells for me, as it's famous for amassing a great monastic following of some 10,000 dedicated practitioners, as contemporarily, including thousands of Buddhist nuns who have become accomplished practitioners, teachers, and leaders. Looking at the photo of this venerable master, although as a Theravada Buddhist I don't believe in the reincarnation of Arahants, I felt as if something of the spirit of Mahāprajāpatī Gotamī Therī did indeed live on in him. Out of Loronggar, in 2013, after years of searching and completing challenging editorial work, the Aryā Tārē Book Association published the first Tibetan language anthology of Buddhist writings by and about women, titled Garland of White Lotuses, the biographies of the great female masters of India and Tibet. Wow. Voices of Loronggar. In Chapter 10 of Voices from Loronggar, Lessons from Buddhist Foremothers, this chapter references the Garland of White Lotuses, the biography of the great female masters of India and Tibet. And it says, never before had Tibetans created an anthology of Buddhist writings by and about Buddhist women at all. This is emerging contemporarily as part of the heritage of this great master who at the least has been greatly inspired by the spirit of Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī. So I'll just add this disclaimer: in the Savakayana or Shravakayana, also known as Theravada traditions, and Arahant has already completed the Savaka Bodhisattva path and become a Savaka Buddha. They are completely unbound and not liable to be reborn again. For as the Buddha himself said explicitly in Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī's regard in our Theravada text, with all asavas cut off, there is for her no more becoming, no future lives. Thus, for those who are fully liberated, who have crossed the floods of sensual desires, having reached unshakable happiness, no destination can be pointed out. The Buddha, in eulogy of Gautamī Therī. Now we've come to the end. Ewang. I'd like to offer my gratitude to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī Therī herself, all our Bhikkhuni founders and great Bhikkhuni Arahants, to all of our Kalyanamitas, our program coordinator, Venerable Ayyā Santini Mahateri, and all the Venerable Bhikkhuni coordinators of the United Theravada Bhikkhunī Sangha International. to longtime Dhamma friend Kun Lee, Venerable Konchog Norbu, translator with 84,000 Project Kaya Fisher, all who have offered the materials for this presentation, to the Dhammadrini Sangha, Dhammadrini Support Foundation, and my personal assistant, Seminary Tavira, for their faithful support. Chirang Titatu Puthasasana. Aradhaviri Pahitate Nichang Dalha Parakame Samake Sawake Pasa Etang Buddhanavantanang. Diligent, ardent, and resolute, always putting forth their best effort, seeing my disciples one and all in harmony. This is homage to the Buddhas. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Anumodana.